We're going to end today with something sort of lighthearted, possibly even fun. Donald Trump Jr. interviewed his father, Donald Trump, obviously. And it was such a bizarre interview where at least the vibe I was getting when watching it was that Trump was annoyed with Don Jr. the whole time. The speculation about their relationship does seem to be accurate. I want to walk you through some moments from this. This is about Trump's new book, Letters to Trump. That is a collection of letters he received from famous people over the years. And by the way, all of this is entertaining to me, but stick around for the last clip because it got me laughing whenever I was preparing for today's show. Starting off with this moment.
The country cannot survive.
You know, President Obama is maybe one of those people. You have his letter in the book, and you know, in reading the letter to you when you took over the White House, it's very preachy about democracy and all that, and yet you were
democracy.
actually 100% right? It wasn't about democracy. He was spying on your campaign. They
False.
started the weaponization of the government that we're talking about, that we're seeing manifested, that we're seeing, you know, Republicans in Congress now attack. But you actually called that way before anyone else. Talk about that letter, the hypocrisy of all of it, because it was elite, preachy towards you, and yet they were doing the exact opposite of what they were saying about democracy.
So I thought the letter was very nice. All right. I thought it was a beautiful letter, beautifully composed, handwritten, all of the things that it should be. It's a very important letter. You know, when you receive those letters from the previous president, it's actually a very important one. And nobody's seen the letter that I wrote to Biden, and I felt that would be up to him if he wanted to do it. But it's given from the heart.
So Trump does, in all fairness, go on to discuss the conspiracy theories that Don Jr. brought up. But I love that little back and forth where Don Jr. sets up this whole subject for Trump. Let's talk about how this letter was hypocritical and preachy and all that. And then Trump goes, yeah, shh. I thought it was nice. The other thing that is always strange to me is if you really believe the things that they say that they believe about Obama and Biden, you wouldn't act like that about letter correspondence. You wouldn't think a letter from a guy who they say spied on his campaign, which didn't happen, and was the worst president and all these different things, was sweet. You would, as Don Jr. was saying, probably think it was hypocritical and fake. Or you wouldn't leave a thoughtful, well-written letter to Biden, as reportedly Biden has said that it was, if you actually thought he was the tyrant who orchestrated a national stealing of the election coup and wrongfully ripped you out of the White House. No, of course not. But in the moment, Trump is like, hey, this is really nice. And while we're all being real, I really appreciate it. Or to Biden, best of luck. But then publicly goes back to his lies. So in a sense, Don Jr. is correct. If we believe these things that we say we believe, then we wouldn't accept nice gestures from these terrible people because obviously they can't be genuine about it. Next moment, about his letters with authoritarian leaders.
Interesting letters in this book. You have the letters from Putin. You have letters from Kim Jong-il. You
Look at Trump's face while his son's talking. He's like, oh my gosh.
You called them love letters and you were criticized, but talk about, well, you were criticized because they didn't understand actual negotiation, in my opinion. But talk about the ability to have that relationship with those people. I don't think we make any qualms and pretend they're wonderful human beings. They're, you know, dictators. But to be able to pick up the phone and actually have a relationship seems like it could stop World War III, which is where we're verging towards these days.
When I called them love letters, I said that obviously sarcastically, but they were letters where there was a certain degree of respect. I would say ultimate respect, and there was a liking. We got along, which is a positive. I tried to explain that's a positive thing, and the fake news picked it up. He said they were love letters. He said, and I just say, they're just so dishonest, and they're so disgusting, and they're so bad for our country.
So the media is wrong for reporting on you saying you wrote love letters back and forth with Kim Jong-un. Even if you were joking, as he just said there, it did represent a, quote, respect and, quote, liking. You can get along with dangerous, horrible leaders for the purposes of global stability and for foreign policy purposes, but that doesn't usually include, quote, liking horrible authoritarian leaders, as he just said. But as I've said many times, the reason Trump likes them so much is because he wishes he could be them. He wishes he could have the same type of authoritarian power. Next moment, just a random point he made that I found bizarre, considering how much people on his side use the word that you're about to hear him criticize.
Like we do. They go to the same schools, not as good as some of the schools we went to be honest with you. You know, I always get a kick when they say the elite. I said, oh, are they more elite? That's elite, really?
Well, the elite seem to be having a hard time paying for their college loans, and they want hardworking Americans to do that, which also seems pretty ironic.
The term elite is ridiculous, but, you know, they like to use it. I don't know, it's somehow a term.
So the right-wing populist, as it's called, movement is all about the elite that's against true Americans. But instead of referring to what I think you could fairly refer to as an elite, billionaires, millionaires, and corporations that hold a wildly disproportionate amount of the country's wealth and power, they're referencing the deep state or the globalists or the trans agenda or something like that. But that's constantly what the right is talking about. That elite, right? The rainbow mafia, as I heard it referred. Someone called the LGBTQ community, or I guess this is a term now, the rainbow mafia. But since I guess Trump doesn't like feeling like anyone is above him, he doesn't resonate with that term. Very interesting. Next moment.
For them. You mentioned about the tapes on January 6th. Well, there's something went on, and it'll be interesting because I think Tucker probably now is in a position where he can say what happened, but he was all gung-ho about it. This was going to be running for a long time because he had a lot of tape, and all of a sudden it was just sort of shut down, never to be spoken of again. And I think that was a hard period for Tucker, to be honest with you.
I've heard this now multiple times from multiple right-wingers about why Tucker Carlson hyped up all the truth that was going to be exposed with the January 6 tapes and then did like a day or two of coverage that proved nothing and then just stopped talking about it. It was hyped up as if it was going to be a big extended story over multiple days with all these bombshells, and then there was just nothing. And Tucker Carlson, like I said, stopped talking about it. And Trump thinks, we talked about Dinesh D'Souza saying the same thing, this is because Tucker was silenced in some way. Maybe it's because Tucker got access to the tapes, and even his dishonest propagandistic self could only squeeze a day of a fake narrative out of it. Maybe it's because there wasn't some big other truth to reveal. We know the truth, and it reveals you, Trump, to be an anti-democratic danger to the country. Last moment, hilarious to me. Donald Trump Jr. twice in a row tries to set up Trump to give an answer. Trump immediately takes it in a completely different direction. Here's this.
Talk about your relationship with Rush Limbaugh. There's some, incredible letter from Rush. He gave him the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Amongst our people, he would have been, a Tucker type character, right? A once in a generation type character, thought leader, etc. You had a really interesting relationship with him, and probably one that maybe many wouldn't have ever thought would have emerged the way it did, given sort of your apolitical nature prior to this.
He looks so annoyed when Don Jr. is asking the question. Okay, get it over with.
So Rush was special. I didn't know Rush at all. I heard of Rush, and I saw Rush on television.
Okay, so the question's about Rush Limbaugh. You heard it. He quickly goes to something completely different.
Never met him. And when I made the announcement in 2015 that I was running for president, I made it at the base of the escalator in a building that you know very well, right? Trump Tower, and came down with Melania and the kids, or the kids. We'll always say kids because when they're the kids, they're the kids. But even if they're a little older than you would think of, but when the family was there and Melania was there, everybody was there, and I made a speech. I didn't have speechwriters or anything, but I talked about the wall. I talked about the rape that takes place. I talked about everything. And
all
it
accurate
got
and
great
now worse.
reviews until about 2 or 3 days later when
He just talks through Don Jr. Oh my goodness.
they said, did he say rape? Well, it turned out that the word rape, as used by me, was peanuts compared to what happens, because the women coming up in those caravans, it's a travesty what's going on. The raping and the pillage, and it's horrible. And pouring into our country at levels never seen before.
So then he just goes and goes and goes all on that. And then let me see if I can find to skip forward because it's a long clip. He just starts talking about all of his normal things from rallies we've heard and all that. Doesn't get back to Rush Limbaugh until Don Jr. asks this question.
Pouring to our country is unthinkable.
So you mentioned the
infamous escalator line, which is sort of an amazing start, right? Who would have thought that was the start of an entire political movement, maybe the largest in American history? But
Come on.
in the elevator before the escalator ride, you actually said something to me. I wrote it down in my book, Triggered. I just thought it was sort of fascinating because you understood it. And you said, now's when we find out who our real friends are. Meaning you understood the way the world works. If you're going to do this, you're going to make enemies of people who were friends 15 minutes before that, but more importantly, that you chose to do it anyway, despite, sort of that consequence. What have you learned?
You chose to go out and just demonize a bunch of people and lose your friends because of it. So brave.
Learned about friendship and loyalty since then? Because I thought business was vicious until we got into politics, and now you realize that's a whole new level.
So you mentioned Rush. So Rush heard my speech, saw the whole thing, and he was with me from that moment on. I never met him, and they said, Rush Limbaugh is with you, and he ended up in...
So then for the sake of time, I need to speed this up. But then he just starts talking about Rush. He doesn't connect it and go, so what you said earlier, some people, weren't like Rush. Rush was the good friend that everyone wishes to have or whatever. It just is as if he is answering the first question now. Fascinating. I'll show you the end.
They want introductions because they'd like to get the support. I never met Rush. He was the biggest guy. He had like 39 million people listening. And out of nowhere, they said, this guy loves you. He's going to endorse you. I said, I don't even know him. He just liked what I had to say. I talked about the borders. I talked about military. I talked about education. I talked about a lot of things. No speechwriter. Most of it was just off the cuff. He loved what I had to say. And from that moment on, that was a very special day. But from that moment on, Rush Limbaugh was with me 100%.
You had some interesting correspondence with...
Just so bizarre. That tells you a lot about Trump, just the way his brain thinks and everything comes back to him. And goodness. Make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel. It's greatly appreciated.